I'm not gonna do another build this summer. I'm gonna use some of that money to buy a bike bag and do all that.
Stop the cap. Stop the cap right now.
Yo, welcome back to the channel, boys and girls. Today is a very special video because this frame that you see right here, I believe that I have finally found the pinnacle of cheap Chinese aero bikes. I believe my search and my quest for this type of frame for an affordable price has finally been accomplished. In fact, I believe that this frame, based on the rides that I've done so far with this bike, I believe that this frame can compete with the likes of my Windspace T1500 Aero frame set, as well as my Yolio R12. I'm super duper excited. So in today's video, guys, I'm going to talk about the specs and details on this brand, this manufacturer. Of course, we're going to go over the specs, why I chose this frame. We'll talk about my dislikes for this frame, my likes, and then we'll take this bike out on the road and see how it feels so far. I'm super duper excited. So without further ado, let's begin. All right, guys, so as I mentioned in the introduction to this video, I believe that this bike or frame, I should say, has the likings to compete with the likes of a Windspace T1500 or a Yolio R12 for less than half the price. So the name of this manufacturer is called Yishun or Yishun. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Let me know in the comments how to pronounce it. But basically, they are a Chinese manufacturer, and they do a lot of private brands, private label frames for some of the higher price bikes on the market today. Now, this just isn't just some cheap Chinese bike. The price on this is $750, but it's only because it's factory direct. It has nothing to do with the fact that this frame being cheap or anything like that. And the very specific reason why I chose this frame is simply because of the geometry. Now, I can't stress how important it is to have a geometry that suits your needs. For me, with this one has the longest reach and the shortest stack of any frame that I've ever tested on this channel, whether it's from the cheap Chinese or even some of the major brands on the market today. And because the reach on this is so long, I just knew I had to try it. This frame has actually been on my list for probably the last 6 to 9 months. So I'm super excited to finally get my hands on this frame set. Now, the price for this is about $750, including shipping from China. Shipping took about 3 to 4 weeks. I simply contacted them, I paid, and then they sent this frame out to me after I made my purchase. Alrighty, boys and girls, you know what time it is. It's time to go ahead and weigh out the frame set. But before we do, huge shout out to Luther Vandross. My mom loves Luther Vandross. He's got such classic hits in the catalog with songs like A House Is Not at Home, as well as Let's Have a Party. Shoo-be-dee-bee-bee-dee-boo-boo, well, alright. Do-be-dee-doo-doo. Oh, yeah. Shoo-be-dee-bee-boo. All right, this is a size 54. Try to get this to stick on here. Oh, my goodness. All right. Size 54 frame, we have 1,114 grams. We will do next the seat post with the saddle clamp installed. 238 grams. Next up, we have the 130 millimeter carbon stem. That is 181 grams. Uncut fork, 487 grams. That's actually a little bit heavier than some of the other forks I've tested for the road bikes, probably about 75 to 80 grams heavier. And last but not least is the carbon handlebars. 242 grams. So let's continue. Next up, let's talk about some of the components on this frame set. So of course, we have my 1x system here. We have a 1x chainring courtesy of PassQuest. I've already discussed this on my recent video on my Tan10 X38. We have a SRAM Force eTap setup. Cassette out back is a 10 to 30, and then the chainring out front is a 52 tooth chainring. We've got my Look carbon keel pedals, which I like, all the usual fare. Now, the one thing I do want to talk about is my Elite Drive 65D wheels, because it's been quite a while since you've seen these wheels on this channel. It's probably been at least 9 months, maybe to a year since I've used these wheels, but I thought that for such an aero looking frame that these wheels will be appropriate for it. So these are 65 millimeters deep. External width on these is 28, and the internal is 21 millimeters as far as the width goes. Now, as far as tires I'm running my standard Continental GP5000 28C tires, and I'm running a TPU inner tube, which saves about 100 grams total for the set. Now, speaking of weights, this whole entire setup you see right here, actually minus the power meter, bottle cages, garment mount, etc., you're looking at about 7.5 kilograms, which I think is pretty good for an Aero frame, especially for one of this high quality, and so far everything has worked very well as intended.
Alrighty, we are literally taking the very first ride on my Yishun R086 Aero frame set. The first things I can tell right away, now I do want to make it clear that I will be doing a long-term review on this bike because I think it's only fair. So I don't want to say anything completely outlandish. However, I think it's going to be safe to say that this frame set, especially with the setup I'm currently running, that this will probably be the final cheap Chinese bike build that I do. Not because I'm sick and tired of doing them, which I am a little bit, but because I think that this bike is going to finally be the king. This bike is going to replace my dang fool R12, which I love so much, and it's even going to replace my Velo Build 177, which I also like. This frame, it feels so far on the first ride that it punches above its weight for what I paid for this frame. If I were to close my eyes, I would say this bike feels more like a $1,500 frame set versus the $700 that I paid. And it makes sense because Yishun, since they are a OEM manufacturer and they do a lot of private brands, I'm not sure if this is exactly an open mold design, but just everything that I've experienced with this bike, with building the frame, the fit and finish, just the ride feel, everything about this frame set so far. Again, this is just the first ride, so I'll have to do more testing, but so far this first ride, the best way I could describe it is it feels premium. It doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel clattery like my Tan X38. It doesn't feel kind of numb like my Velo Build 168. It feels very, very good. I would even go as far as to say, like, so far, maybe if you wanted to hop in some races, even though I don't race, which some of you guys criticize, this bike so far feels like it's going to be a bike that, yeah, man. I like this bike a lot, I'm not gonna lie. I might actually be able to finally replace this with my Specialized LA Sprint, because this bike so far, again, this is the first ride, I want to make that clear. I can't stress that enough, but this very first ride, from what I'm feeling going on the roads I normally go on every single week, so far this bike feels really, really good. Now, obviously, one of the main reasons why this frame just works so well for me is because the geometry on this bike, it just suits me so well. You figure you have a very long reach and a very low stack, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why this frame even exists. I don't know why this frame set exists for being, you know, a quote-unquote cheap Chinese bike, because like the geometry on this bike, it's very racy. It's extremely racy. It's not for someone maybe who's got a long torso, who's got short arms. This bike is one of those bikes where the geometry is similar to like a Specialized LA Sprint. Drop a comment down below if you think this is the best looking frame and bike setup that I've reviewed or tested on this channel so far. So let's go ahead and do a quick bike check here. We got the Yishun. Also drop in the comments down below how to properly pronounce Yishun, I don't know. So the frame set is the R086D Aero frame set. The color is a runaway slave black matte finish. I'm just kidding, but it is pretty dark, right? Am I right? Alrighty, so as far as the things that I dislike about this frame upon first initial impressions, there's really only one. So as much as I like this separate handlebar and stem combo, you unfortunately are stuck within using the Yishun ecosystem as far as setting up the stem, the headset bearing cap, all that stuff. Now, obviously, it appears that there has been a lot of thought that went into this design versus using the sort of standard headset cover bearing, as you see on basically all the other cheap frames on the market, which is cool. But unfortunately, because of this design, you are stuck using their components. So they do offer up a couple of different integrated handlebars. I just went with the separate stem is because they offered 130 millimeters. So even though the frame set itself, if you look at the geometry chart, even though this frame, the stack is pretty low for what it is, however, it's still not as low as my wind space or my Specialized LA Sprint. And in part is, even though I'm basically, the stem is slammed as far as I can go, and even though the headset bearing cup is recessed a little bit to accommodate the cover, basically with this being a negative 10-degree stem, and you know, this whole system right here, it does just make this ride a little bit higher than the other bikes within you know, the $1,500 price range. But again, this is still going to be more than most people are going to need, and it's basically one for one as far as the setup goes with my Specialized LA Sprint and my wind space hyper frame set. Next up, moving on to the things that I like about this frame set so far. So it's very clear that a lot of attention and detail went into this frame set. Like I said, because this bike is essentially an OEM frame for his private labels on the market, there's a lot of things that Yishun did exceptionally well. So first up, when it came to the caliper mounts being faced, absolutely perfect. They are just as good as my Specialized LA Sprint and my wind space T1500 frame set. No issues, no quirks mounting the calipers and getting them aligned. It only took a couple of minutes, but the caliper mounts were faced very, very well. Now, some of the other details is the seat post cover. It's not sloppy at all. Some of the other brands that offer up the rubber seat post cover, it's kind of sloppy and it moves around, but this is very tight on there. So it's clear that the tolerance on this is really good. And like I said, even though this headset system, you know, you're stuck using their components, but there's a lot of thought that just went into this frame, which I really like. Another thing too that they also offered is, even though I'm using SRAM eTap for this frame, they actually included the rubber battery mount for Di2, and that's not something that you really see for $700 USD. Interesting enough, this stem is 130 millimeters -10 carbon stem. Now this is the identical stem that I have as far as the design as I have on my Yolio R12 frame set. So that kind of lets you know that Yishun, they're not playing around. They are manufacturing for some of the more premium brands out on the market today. So we have that. We have the handlebars. Now Yishun, they label these handlebars as 40 centimeters width, but I did my own measurements and it's actually 38 centimeters on the hood, center to center, and then in the drops it widens or flares out to 40 centimeters. So I like, so 38 on the top, 40 centimeters on the drops, which I like because it helps me get a little bit more aerodynamics for my build. So it's clear that this frame exists because Yishun, the manufacturer of this frame, it's clear that they've thought about a very specific type of a geometry, a very specific type of rider who would need such a long reach and a low stack. And I think that this is one of the things that makes this bike very unique for the price point. Man, yeah, so far I have a lot of praises for this bike. Of course, the geometry is not going to be for everyone, like I said, but if you are someone that just needs a lot of reach and you still want some of the aerodynamic benefits of an Aero frame, slap on some Aero wheels like these Elite Drive 65D wheels, you have a bike that you're going to be able to enjoy for a very, very long time. I forgot to also mention too that the frame you see in front of you, the size on this is a size 54. Now I typically run a size 56, but the geometry on this thing is just so aggressive. I want to say that the reach, I'll put the geometry chart on the screen, but the reach on this is like 402, and then the stack is, I don't know, it's like 540. Just crazy aggressive setup. And the saddle height, the saddle to the center of the bottom bracket, for me, I usually run around 77.5, 77.8 centimeters, and I am 6 feet tall. One of the common questions I receive all the time is when I'm reviewing and testing out these cheap $600, $700 frames is how do they compare with something like a Specialized LA Sprint or a Windspace T1500 Aero frame set. And my typical response is it's kind of unfair to compare the cheap bikes to those bikes because they are, in fact, you know, in a completely different category. However, for this bike, this R08 or R086, yes, again, first impressions, I want to make that clear. I should probably put up a counter on how many times I say that in this video, but first impressions, I think that this bike is going to be able to compete with the likes of those. And like I said, you know, if this company is, or this factory is in fact an OEM supplier for some of the bigger private labels out there, then I think it makes sense that this bike is competing with the $1,500 bikes. Obviously, I can't tell you right now whether or not I prefer this over my Windspace or my Yolio or my LA Sprint. I'm gonna need a few months to put this bike through all of its paces, but as far as just how it feels, just how composed it is out on the road, again, because the geometry is a little bit longer, that does offer a little bit more smoothness. It's not going to be super darty as, you know, a super small frame set, but I bet you if you go down some descents, some crazy hills or mountains, I bet you that this bike is going to feel super planted and super controlled. And these are all the things that you would come to expect for the frame sets that costing at least, you know, $1,500 and up.
So that is going to wrap up today's video. As I mentioned in this video, I still have to do a lot more testing on this bike, but so far, based on the amount of rides I've done with this frame, I do truly believe that this frame is something very, very special. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them down below, and I will check you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.